live from 5 every Monday and Wednesday from 5 to 7. Radio GIPA 94.3. Okay, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. We're here in the Radio GIPA studio in the Frontline Club here in Sololaki. And I'm joined today in the studio by our guest Courtney Austrian, who is the head of the Public Affairs section at the US Embassy here in Tbilisi. Thank you very much for joining us, Courtney. First of all, why don't you introduce a little bit about what tell us a little bit about what your office does in the embassy.
I'm delighted, and it's great to be here today. The Public Affairs section in the embassy has a couple of different roles that we play. The first one that I think most people have some kind of exposure to is that the Public Affairs section handles all of the media for the embassy. And so we are the prime interface between the embassy and both domestic and international media in Georgia. We also run the embassy's website and all of our social media platforms. And so we are oftentimes the first place that people actually have contact with the American embassy. The second thing that we do is that my office oversees all of the exchanges that the US government does in Georgia. And so these are both professional exchanges, but much more commonly are the education exchanges. And those range from the Flex program, which is high school students, to the Fulbright program, which is graduate students. And then we also do some cultural activities, such as bringing American music groups to Georgia, or we had a comic book artist that came to visit earlier this year and worked with students in Georgia about developing their own comic books. And then we finally have, we oversee the grants for the assistance grants for the State Department. And so we do a bunch of grants every year. The Democracy Commission grants are probably the most well-known, and those are grants of up to about $24,000 that primarily help civil society in Georgia. So. Okay.
You're a career diplomat, you were
Yes.
saying just before we started this interview. How did you end up in Georgia? What were some of your previous posts?
Well, I'd like to start by saying I actually sort of became a diplomat by accident. Both my parents were diplomats with the US State Department. And so I grew up in this life, and I never thought that I would follow my parents in their footsteps.
That's what parents do, they mess up the children's
lives.
I
know. So at any rate, to join the US Foreign Service is an examination process. And I took the test just to prove to my parents that I was doing other things because I chose to do it, not because I couldn't get into the Foreign Service.
Right.
And so I was working for National Geographic and a couple of other places along the way in Washington, D.C. And I happened to be looking for work at about the same time as the State Department was had called and offered me a position in one of the next classes. And so after some hemming and hawing, I thought, okay, I'll do this for a little while. I thought maybe I would do it for 4 years, and I've been doing it for over 20 now. So I think this was a career path that that actually met a lot of my needs, that gave me a lot of real career pleasure, and that I can't imagine not having done at this point. But my first assignment was to Haiti, where I worked in the consular section. I then went to Syria, and I worked both in the consular and in the political sections there in Damascus for 2 years, which was a really interesting time because I was in Syria with the transition of power between Assad Sr. and Bashar al-Assad, the current president. From there I went back to Washington, where I worked in something called the Operations Center, which is the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week office at the State Department that is always on duty and works for the secretary. And I transitioned from that over to another office that supported and supports the secretary. And I worked for Secretary Colin Powell for 2 years, working to advance his foreign travel when he was staffing him when he did his foreign travel, as well as staffing back in Washington. I then, for the first time, came to this part of the world. I went to the embassy in Moscow for 2 years, where I was the press attaché, and then to Kiev, where I was the cultural affairs attaché, then back to Washington again, and then now back out in Georgia, where I've been for 2.5 years and have loved almost every minute of it.
Naturally.
Naturally, I mean, really.
Yeah. I know it might be difficult to say, but is there any of these postings which really stick out in your mind, some of that really you felt really changed you?
I think all of them do to some extent. Haiti's where I met my husband. Right. So for all that being in Haiti was very challenging, there's a lot of good memories from that. As I said, you know, Syria, being there when Assad died, and being out on the street with people, they didn't know how to react when he died. And for the majority of people who lived in Syria, they did not remember a time when he had not been president. Right. So it was a very transformational moment for the country. And it was very interesting being a witness to that.
Were you out on the streets?
I was, yeah. I probably shouldn't. We were told not to go out on the streets because the embassy was worried it was going to be too dangerous. Right. But I think it's been long enough now that I won't get in trouble.
No one's no emails arriving in your inbox.
No, and it was perfectly fine. Russia, just because Russia was a place that I had only ever heard about, and honestly, when I was at school, I never thought I would ever end up in Moscow. It just seemed like a world that was too far away. And so it was really fascinating being there. And it's where we had our first child, and so, you know, a very special connection personally as well as professionally in Moscow. And then I should have known when we went to Kiev that I was going to end up in Georgia someday, because we lived on Chateau Rustaveli Street. So there was a little bit of foreshadowing there that I was not aware of at the time.
Clearly. Exactly.
Yes.
When you take on these postings, it's always interesting to me, how much do you sort of throw yourself into the culture of the place where you're going to spend the next few years? Is it your choice to learn language? Are you offered or told to learn the language?
Yes. This is actually one of my great embarrassments actually about being in Georgia, is that I came with Russian and not with Georgian. And so while I can read a little bit, I do feel like I am very much not able to participate in life in Georgia to the extent that I would like to be able to participate.
I think you and me both, actually.
Okay, so this is one thing that I really am disappointed in myself about. But that said, I would say that without language, we really are working as much as we can to enjoy as much of Georgia as we can. And so for us, this has meant actually getting out of Tbilisi and exploring as much of the country as possible. Yeah. So earlier this year, we spent time in Tusheti, which was phenomenally gorgeous. I really, even knowing that I would have to do that road again, I would go back in a heartbeat.
Well, next time maybe by horseback.
We did horses once we got there. Yeah. We had that, what is it, 70 kilometers? I don't know. That's
up to the Abano Pass.
Up to the pass and then down. Yeah. Have done a lot of hiking in the mountains here. Do a lot of skiing. Really do as much outside as possible.
Is this more than in other postings you've been in? Do you feel like you have more of a choice here in places to go?
Much more so. And I think partly it's just that in some ways Georgia is a lot easier to travel around than some of the other places. Partly because my family is a little bit older now, so with older children you can do more. But I think it is also that Georgia is such a hospitable place that really we have felt welcome everywhere we have gone. And so it's, I feel very sorry for the people who don't leave Tbilisi. Wonderful as Tbilisi is. Yeah. But it's just part of Georgia. And if you only know this reality of Georgia, I don't think you get a picture of what the whole country is like at all. So for me, it's a great pleasure to be able to do a little bit of both.
I've noticed that some of the staff at the embassy speak excellent Georgian, and I've seen Christmas videos or New Year's videos of people speaking fluent Georgian. How does that work? Who helps them with that?
People study Georgian before they get here. So those people who are actually able to speak Georgian usually spend at least a year studying Georgian before they ever arrive in Tbilisi. Right. One of the Christmas videos, the one last year, with people singing was actually filmed in my house. And not everybody who sang was fluent, but they were fluent at the song by the time we finished.
That's what's important.
That was what's important. So.
Let's talk a little bit about GIPA. So the US Embassy in Tbilisi is a huge supporter of both GIPA as an educational institution and also of our radio station, which we're all very proud and happy to work for. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I think that with GIPA and with the US support for GIPA, what you're seeing is really a lot of where the US is actually putting a lot of support right now. It's about creating institutions, it's about creating quality opportunities for education in Georgia, and it's about really advancing civil society and the private sector as well in a lot of ways. And so GIPA was one of the early places that the US government really put a lot of support into education. And I think everybody would agree that it was an investment that the return on that investment has been huge over the years. And so we're really delighted to continue to partner with GIPA as GIPA expands and really grows to fill its own place in the Georgian academic environment. And so it's really a thrill to watch that take place. But I think that our investment in GIPA was an early sign of some of the things that are happening now as well through the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is doing a compact that is just related to education in Georgia, although the focus for the MCC compact is mostly in the STEM area. But we really do believe that for Georgia's continued success and continued Euro-Atlantic integration or orientation, that quality education along Western models is a very important facet of that. And so I think GIPA was really the very beginning of that, that push in a lot of ways.
GIPA is very strong in public administration, in journalism and other areas. Maybe some of these students in the future might consider or be considering now a career in diplomacy. What advice would you give to them? What words of encouragement do you think you'd give to them?
I think that the biggest advice that I have for anybody who wants to do a career in public service, really, but in diplomacy in particular, is that you really need to be flexible. I would never have said at the outset of my career what it was going to look like today. And if I had been very rigid in what I thought the progression of steps needed to be in order to get from point A to point H, whatever, I think I would have been very disappointed and I would have missed a lot along the way. But by being flexible and by being open to opportunities, I think that I've had a really fascinating career, and I have taken advantage of opportunities that I never would have otherwise even expected to have open to me. And for all that people say that diplomats, you move very slowly, very cautiously, it is still a career where flexibility is, I think, absolutely crucial. But a little bit of imagination helps too.
Excellent. There you go. Flexibility and imagination, some skills you might not learn only in the classroom. I've been speaking to Courtney Austrian from the Public Affairs section of the American Embassy here in Tbilisi. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great pleasure.
We look forward to having you tune into our radio show. Keep listening to Radio GIPA 94.3. Live from 5 every Monday and Wednesday from 5 to 7. Radio GIPA 94.3.